Thank you, everybody. Again, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to focus on getting folks prepared for the upcoming Energy Independence Summit. We're going to talk a little bit about our federal policy agenda on alternative fuels for the coming year, strategies to make that happen, and what the outlook is with the new administration. So again, thanks everybody for being here today. First of all, just want to give a special shout out to our many sponsors who help contribute to our organization and help make the Energy Independence Summit possible. We truly appreciate your support and certainly welcome others in the alternative fuels industry to join with us. So thanks again to all of our sponsors. Quick background just to remind folks, Transportation Energy Partners was created to support the nation's Clean Cities coalitions that are part of the Department of Energy's Clean Cities program, and the 15,000 stakeholders that participate in the 90-plus coalitions around the country. We focus on keeping the coalitions and stakeholders informed about key policies, programs, and funding opportunities, and we work to educate policymakers about the importance of advancing markets for alternative fuels and vehicles. I think, as everybody knows, we have our upcoming Energy Independence Summit that's going to take place on February 12th through the 15th in Washington, D.C. This is a particularly important year. I think, as everybody obviously knows, we have a new president, a new administration that has taken office and getting themselves organized. We have some new leadership in Congress, changes in the air, so it's a great opportunity to come to Washington and build relationships with the new folks in town, and also to strengthen our relationships with our many allies in Congress. Some of the highlights of the upcoming summit, we'll hear from some of the new administration leaders. We will have Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island. We will have the new director of the Vehicle Technologies Office at the Department of Energy, Michael Berube. We will have roundtables with the federal agencies. We'll have presentations on opportunities created by the settlement with Volkswagen. We will have a special reception on Monday evening honoring our long-term friend Paul Kirkhoven from NGV America, who's retiring and has given great service over the years to our organization, the Clean Cities coalitions across the country, and others in the alternative fuels movement. On Tuesday, February 14th, we will spend the day on Capitol Hill. We anticipate that we'll be having more meetings with more than 250 congressional offices this year, and that will be an important part of our effort as well. So I know many of you are already signed up, and for those of you who haven't signed up, please register. Make sure you come to DC because it's very important this year. In terms of Transportation Energy Partners, our priorities for the coming year are as follows. One is to extend the tax incentives for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure, to increase federal funding for key programs supporting alternative fuels, to preserve and extend the renewable fuel standard, to authorize the Clean Cities program, and also to include alternative fuels infrastructure in any new infrastructure initiatives that will be enacted by the Congress and the new administration, which I think, as people know, there's been a lot of discussion about that. Want to remind folks that if you do have questions, just submit them in the question box. And as always, people ask about the slides. The slides and a recording of the webinar will be available on our website after the event. Briefly, just to remind folks that we had a number of clean transportation victories in 2016. Some were partial victories and some complete victories. The tax incentives were extended through the end of 2016. It was a victory previously. I guess it's only a partial victory because they have since expired, and a big focus is to see that they get extended. The Renewable Fuel Standard was finalized by EPA through 2017 and through 2017 and 2018 for biomass-based diesel. We were successful in getting both the House and Senate to increase funding for the DOE Clean Cities program by $10 million. That extra money, if enacted, it hasn't been enacted yet, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but if enacted over the next several months, that additional funding will go to competitive grants for deployment. So that was a high priority for us, and this, the House increased funding. It says here the Senate, it was actually the House increased funding for the EPA diesel emission reduction grants by $50 million up to $100 million, but that's also still needs to be finalized. But our work over the past several years has been very successful in building partnerships with Congress and helping to move the ball forward on our many priorities. I think everybody knows that change is in the air. I think a lot of people are worried about what's coming next in terms of our industry and the issues that we work on. I think at this stage of the game it's important to be vigilant, but I think we need to wait and see, because I think it's really uncertain as to what exactly is going to happen on a going forward basis. And many of the conditions out in the world, in addition to having a new administration, are similar as they've been in the past. We still have relatively low gas prices, but they remain volatile and could increase at any time. We have an economy that has been steadily improving, but has not benefited everyone around the country. And there's still a need for particularly an increase in creation of well-paying jobs. We continue to be dependent on foreign oil, maybe a little less than in the past, but we're still very dependent on foreign oil, and the Middle East remains extremely volatile, as everybody knows. In terms of the Trump administration, we certainly don't know everything, and it's not clear what they're going to do, but some of the things that have clearly been themes for the administration that we should all be paying attention to. One is will be a heavy focus on creation of jobs in America. There's been a lot of discussion about increasing production of American sources of energy, discussion about an all-of-the-above energy strategy, a focus on reducing regulations that impact development. Certainly been discussion about comprehensive tax reform and also about investment in infrastructure. And all of these items, I think, present things to pay attention to, as well as potential opportunities for our industry. I think people have been reading here some of the key leaders of the incoming administration. None of these folks have been confirmed yet, though I would anticipate several of them will be confirmed in the next coming days and weeks. And again, I think it remains to be seen what things are going to look like once they take hold. their new positions within the various federal agencies. Again, just as a reminder of things that have taken place, the federal tax incentives have been extended through 2016, but they've now expired. In terms of the outlook, I think the things to be aware of, one is that tax reform appears to be a high priority for the new administration and for the Congress. There are certainly some in the Congress who want to eliminate the various clean energy tax incentives, and there are many who want to preserve them. So I think this will be an important place for all of us to focus our attention. And below are listed some of the key leaders of the tax committees, particularly for folks who are in those states. In terms of let's see, we'll go to the renewable fuel standard. I think people know that the renewable fuel standard is working, and in many ways it's been one of the most effective policies in advancing alternative fuels. It's good for energy security, it's good for the economy, it's good for the environment. As I mentioned, it's been extended through 2017 and then through 2018 for biomass-based biodiesel. And I think our strategy is, again, to educate the incoming leadership at EPA about the importance of this policy, and then also to work with our partners to work with the Congress as well. In terms of funding priorities, we have the same top two funding priorities. One is to maintain the increased funding for the Clean Cities program, including more funding for competitive grants, and also to maintain the increased funding for the EPA clean diesel grants. As I mentioned, while we were successful with the House, both the House and the Senate, in terms of Clean Cities funding, and with the House for the EPA clean diesel grants, the federal funding levels, appropriations levels for fiscal year 2017 have not yet been finalized. As you know, we are in the middle of fiscal year 2017. It started on October 1st, and the budgets for this year have not been finalized. We're essentially operating on what's called a continuing resolution, which means, and that will be through the end of April of 2017, and that means we're operating under last year's budget numbers. So the hope is when, after the Congress is finished with, particularly the Senate, with the nomination process for all the incoming cabinet and other officials, that Congress will need to focus on finishing up the fiscal year 2017 funding levels, and our hope and our plan is to be in there, and we've been continuing to work on this, is to make sure that the funding increases that were approved last year end up in the final legislation for the current year. Let's see. In terms of our recommendations for the Clean Cities program, these were our recommendations last year, and they will be again this year, is to make sure that any increases in funding are used for deployment projects, that they're used for a broad range of alternative fuels, the full gamut, that at least $15 million goes for competitive grants, and that we focus on smaller grants, not too small, but in the $500,000 to $1 million per grant range. We support this so that there can be more projects in more communities around the country, and also that Clean Cities coalitions should be partners in any of the projects. We already talked about that. In terms of the fiscal year 18 appropriations process, the President will propose his budget probably in March, certainly no earlier than then. And then after wrapping up the fiscal year 2017 process, they will very quickly jump into the fiscal year 2018 process. And the various appropriations subcommittees will consider their legislation typically in May and June. We'll see House and Senate floor action in the fall, and the final appropriations done sometime between September and December typically. Here are some of the key appropriations leaders who we've worked hard to build strong relationships and win support of. I want to give a special shout out to Jonathan Overly and the Tennessee folks for really building a great partnership with Senator Alexander, for Richard Battersby and his team and the 13 California coalitions for working with us, and Senator Feinstein's office, Alicia Cox and Beth Baird and their team of Idaho stakeholders who've helped us work with Mike Simpson, Sam Spofford, Jason Phillips, and the Clean Fuels Ohio team for doing a great job with Congresswoman Capter in Ohio, and also the Twin Cities folks, Lisa Thurston and her team, for working with Congresswoman McCollum from Minnesota, and the California folks have also helped us strengthen our partnership with Congressman Calvert from California, who's been the big champion of the EPA Clean Diesel program. So the work that you all are doing is really making a difference in supporting everybody across the country. So again, thank you very much. Again, our strategy for appropriations this year will be to focus on getting the various members of Congress to make specific requests to the appropriations subcommittee leaders to include our proposed language. And that will be one of the key topics of our meetings during the Energy Independence Summit and Capitol Hill Day. So we'll focus both on getting them to wrap up the fiscal year 2017 appropriations in a positive fashion, and then continue our continue to win their support for the next fiscal year as well. And then very quickly, there are a couple of other opportunities for folks to that we may have to pass positive legislative improvements. One that we've heard a lot about is infrastructure legislation. President Trump and his folks have said this is a high priority. Just this week, the Senate Democratic leadership came out with an ambitious $1 trillion infrastructure proposal that includes $100 million for energy infrastructure. So one of our jobs is to make sure that alternative fuels infrastructure is part of the discussion and included in any new infrastructure legislation. In addition, it's quite possible that later this year we will see a revival of the energy legislation that almost passed last year. It contained a few items related to alternative fuels, not much, but a few. And one of the things that we've started to work on is to get the Clean Cities program authorized as part of this new energy legislation, should it come to pass. So we'll be working on that as well. Overall, in terms of continuing progress, I think the key things to remember are, one, to really build partnerships with the new administration, educate them about the work that you're doing, about the progress that you're making in communities around the country, with a particular focus on individual projects, fleets that are being converted, fuel that's being saved, jobs that are being created, new infrastructure that's being installed. We need to make our case locally. We need to continue to work with our members of Congress to rally our stakeholders, and we hope that all of you will attend the summit this year. So I'm going to take a break and see if anybody's got any questions, and then we're going to talk a little bit about strategies to making sure that you're well prepared for Capitol Hill Day when you come to D.C. So does anybody have any questions out there in webinar land? I am not seeing any questions yet. Any questions? Not seeing any questions. Again, you can type your questions into the box. Again, the presentation will be available on our website, including a recording afterwards. All right, I'm going to keep going then. You can still ask questions. So now we're going to talk about how to make your visits to the congressional offices as effective as possible. I know some out there, particularly some Clean Cities coalitions around the country, and particularly some who have never participated in the summit before, have say, well, why is it important to come to Washington, and why is it important to meet with our policymakers? And I think there are a lot of advantages to your organization. One is it can help build your organization, increase your clout. And that can result in more visibility, more members, more funding. It's an opportunity, obviously, to advance the policies that you care about. And then it's also an opportunity to build long-term relationships with key policymakers who may be able to help you in all kinds of ways down the road. I think in terms of your framework, the most important thing about these visits, it's a great opportunity to build relationships with both members of Congress that you get to meet and also with the key staff in their offices. So as you approach your meetings, you should think about ways that you can be helpful to your elected officials in addition to ways that they can be helpful to you. And some of those ways are, number one, you can be a good source of ideas and information. They're always looking for, oftentimes for new policies. They want to know what's going on in their district. You're on the ground locally. You're helping to produce projects, you know lots of people, you have strong networks, so you can introduce them to people and be a benefit that way. You can provide opportunities for them to get visibility and media coverage by inviting them to events, by including them in press releases, by inviting them to your meetings, by attending their meetings. And you can introduce your elected officials to key constituencies and community leaders that you work with, all of which can benefit them. And in building relationships with the congressional folks, you should not only when you're in Washington, it's a great opportunity to build relationships with their national staff, but while you're you should also take the time back in the district to build relationships with their local staff and also with their, if they're a Senate office, for example, they oftentimes, they have folks all over the state, so you can build relationships with their state staff. To be effective, it's important to remember that all politics is local. You should focus on educating your congressional offices and their staff about the value and benefits of the various clean transportation policies that we're supporting and the benefits to their area. So, for example, providing facts and figures on how clean vehicles and fuels are creating jobs and benefiting the local area. And it's most effective to bring in examples of a new CNG station or propane station or electric charging infrastructure that's been created, examples of fleets that you're working with who are converting their fleets to alternative fuels and who are saving fuel, saving money. And it's very important to demonstrate where possible that our issues are broad-based and that there's bipartisan support, which is certainly the case. After your meetings, it's important to follow up and follow through. You may get a question in the meeting that you may not know the answer to. Don't fake it or fudge it. If you don't know the answer, tell them that you don't know, but you'll find the answer and get back to them. You should send follow-up thank you notes and emails. It's very important to stay in touch beyond your annual meetings in DC. You can send them reports, newsletters, regular updates, call them up on the phone every once in a while. Invite the elected officials or their staff to your local events, and also identify opportunities for media coverage that can involve your elected officials as well. In terms of meeting preparation, we recommend that each of the Clean Cities Coalition prepare a 1 to 2 pager with brief background on your organization and then with specific examples of local projects like we've been talking about. And it's most effective to use examples of local projects in action. It's also extremely helpful to bring photos or maps that can visually display your projects. If you have photos of charging infrastructure or new fueling stations, bring those along. If you have new vehicles out there on the roads, bring those pictures. They're very effective in communicating our message. Bring business cards. Make sure your phones are on vibrate or silent so they don't interrupt the meetings. And this is something that people oftentimes forget. Wear comfortable shoes. You will be doing a lot of walking throughout the Capitol, so having shoes that are comfortable to walk in is very helpful. In terms of when you're in the meeting, be brief and to the point. You should expect the meetings to last at least 15 minutes and typically no more than 30 minutes. You should keep your basic presentation short and leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. You should have a specific request for action. Your offices and their staff want to know how they can help. We will give you materials to leave behind and also specific requests that support the policy agenda that we talked about earlier. You should know as much as possible about the office you're visiting, know the committees they're on, their backgrounds so that you can tailor your your requests to their interests, and we can help you with that. Be factual. It's helpful to know the other side of the debate, so you can be responsive, and it's very important to be respectful. These offices are not going to agree with us on everything. Even if they disagree, we should respect their views, and there may be opportunities to work together on other items in the future. So it's very important to take the long view and seek to build relationships and look for opportunities for agreement and to inform the folks in the offices. In terms of a sample meeting agenda that we've found effective, take a minute at the beginning to introduce your team and your overall message. You should have a team leader who will kind of chair the meeting and keep it on point. You should then have your stakeholders, people in the meeting, provide 2 to 3 examples of local clean fuels projects in action in your area. Then focus on our requests for action, tax incentives, funding, preserving the renewable fuel standard, and then leave time for questions and follow-up. And then here's the assistance that we're providing in organizing the Capitol Hill Day. Again, the way will be organized is there will be teams from about roughly, you know, I would say 30 to 40 teams in roughly 30 to 35 states. I know some of you will be scheduling your own meetings, and these teams will be built typically around the Clean Cities coalitions in those states, and then the various stakeholders and other summit participants will be placed on teams either based on your location or based on your company's interest in particular places and particular policies. We can help schedule meetings. We typically schedule about, I don't know, I would say 70% of the meetings. Some of you do your own, but we typically schedule 70% of the meetings. So if you're a Clean Cities coordinator out there and you'd like us to schedule your meetings, I think we know from most of you, but if we haven't heard from you, please let us know right away and we'll schedule your meetings for you. We will provide sample materials to hand out, including a sample letter that you can use related to our funding requests. We will provide talking points and handouts on the federal policies that you can use in your meetings, and we will get those to you about a week before the event. We'll prepare the packets, but we'll get you the talking points and the handouts in advance so you can look at them before you come to DC. And we'll also give you a sample local press release that you can use to let your local media know that you'll be coming to Washington and what our priorities are for our meetings here in DC. Again, thanks to our sponsors, and I will take some more questions. Okay, I see a couple more questions here. There have been some rumors floating around about some massive budget cuts to various agencies, including articles written about eliminating the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the Department of Energy. I think there are certainly some allies of the administration and maybe some who will be coming in who may want to see significant cuts. I do think it's important to remember that Congress will have a lot to say about that. Congress will decide ultimately on the budget, and I'm not too worried about, while there may be some budget cuts, I'm not too worried about the elimination, for example, of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy within the Department of Energy. Not to say that they can't do things to undermine the effectiveness if they want to, but that's certainly a question that people have had. Let's see, what else do we have here? So here's a question. Some organizations that will be having meetings on Capitol Hill either may not, because of their board or their organization, have permission to lobby when they're in their meetings. So the question is sort of guidance on what is and is not lobbying. So if you go into a meeting and ask somebody to support a specific piece of legislation or to support a specific amount of funding for a specific program, that is considered lobbying technically. However, if you go into a meeting and talk about projects that you're doing in your district, how valuable tax incentives are and how important they are, how valuable the EPA Clean Diesel Grants program is and how effective it is, how important the Clean Cities program is and how effective it is, that would not be considered lobbying. The basic line is if you ask them to support a specific piece of legislation or specific funding. And if anybody wants to talk about that in greater detail, please call me separately and we can talk in greater detail. I think some people are under the impression that a 501c3 nonprofit organization is not allowed to lobby. That is not the case. They are allowed to lobby. There are certain limits on that lobbying, but again, you need to understand those. Somebody asked about approaching the VW settlement. There's going to be discussion of the VW settlement at the summit and opportunities that's created, and I think that's the best way to discuss that. In the meantime, one recommendation I have is that you should be, if you're not already, you should be in touch with the key leaders in your state and try and figure out who in your state is going to be responsible for administering the funds, because basically there are two pots of funds through the two primary pots of funds through the VW settlement. One will be distributed by a trust to the states and tribes around the country, and each of the states and tribes have to develop a plan for spending that money, so you should be in touch with your states or tribes in your area to understand that. And then the second pot of money will actually be managed by Volkswagen, and it'll focus on electric vehicle infrastructure. And we'll hear about that at the summit. Let's see. Does a list? I am not aware yet of a list of settlement points of contact for the VW states as of now. Let's see, I'm looking at other questions here. Hang on 1 minute. Question about what relationship do we have to hydrogen and electric power infrastructure. We're hoping to have somebody at the summit who will talk about and provide an update on hydrogen infrastructure and hydrogen fueling, hydrogen-fueled vehicles that are being promoted around the country. And I think that's the last question. Any other questions from folks out there? Last chance, please, for questions. I have one comment on renewable diesel, encouraging us to make sure that there's an update on progress with renewable diesel, and there will be at the summit. We'll have a number of people talking about that. Well, seeing no more questions, I just want to again thank our sponsors. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. Again, I hope that you'll be able to join us. If you haven't registered for the summit, please go to www.transportationenergypartners.org, www.transportationenergypartners.org, and you can sign up for the summit. Please email or call me if you have questions or comments, suggestions. Again, today's webinar, the recording and the slides will be up hopefully by tomorrow on our website if you want to take a look at that. And again, I think this is a really, again, we're in an uncertain time. Change is in the air, and it's important, as they say, if you don't want to get a seat at the table to make sure that you're not on the menu. So we need to be in there educating people and reminding them about the great work that you're doing all over the country, the great advances that we're making in the marketplace, the jobs that are being created, the projects that are being developed, and the promise that we have for the future in the clean energy business. So with that, thanks everybody again for participating, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks again. Take care. Bye.